In this short video, I want to show you the mental model behind React and Redux, and I also want to show you why React and Redux is such a cool way of thinking about web applications or GUI applications as a whole. Let's take a step back and look into why Redux together with React is so cool and so easy to reason about. But to do this, we have to do something which is a little bit off topic first, and that's talking about reduce. So you might know the reduce function from functional programming, where you have a list of things and you can call reduce on it. And this reduce, or especially the reduce, there's two or more variants, but the variant I'm interested in right now gets a reducer, which is a function. So let's use plus here, and an initial state. Let's use 5 here. And what happens here is reduce computes a single value of this list. And it does this by taking the initial value and the first element and applying the function. So the result here is 6. Then it takes this value and the second element and applies the function again. And the result here is 8. Then it takes this result and the third element, which is 3 in our case, and applies the function again. And the result here is 11. And then it takes this result and our final element, which is 4, applies the function again, and the result here is 15. So what does this have to do with Redux? The idea here is that the current state in the Redux store is the result of a reduce operation. And this works like that. We have the list of all actions. So every action that was ever passed to the store, if we imagine all those actions as a list, then the current state is all those actions dot reduce with our reducer, the reducer we wrote, and of course the initial state. Because our first state is the initial state. And when the first action arrives, our reducer computes the first next state. And when the next action arrives, our reducer computes the second next state. And so on. So really the current state is all past actions dot reduce, the reducer we wrote and the initial state we wrote. So let's go back to the big picture and see what that means. When we were talking about the one-way data binding, we said that the result we see in the browser is determined by the state of the application. So if we know what's in here in the Redux store, then we know what the browser will display. Because the state of the Redux store will be passed to our components, which are more or less pure functions. They get some state and render a representation, and for the same state they always render the same representation. And then React only takes this rendered representation in a virtual DOM, compares it to the real DOM, and creates the DOM operations, so everything here is pure too. This means if we know what's in the store, we know what the browser will render, and if we know what the browser has rendered, we know what's in the store. But it's even better because we know what's in the store if we know all actions that ever happened. So if if we know the list of all actions that ever happened, then we know exactly what's in the store. Because the reducer here is again a pure function, and the action creator is also a pure function. So if we know all the events that ever happened, we know exactly what's in the store, and if we know exactly what's in the store, we know exactly what the browser will display. And this is a really cool way of thinking about applications. This way of thinking about applications applies to probably all user interface technologies. But with React and Redux, you can find all those parts in the code. And you could even store the list of actions. You could store this list somewhere, and you would get the capability to replay user actions. Like a user has a defect, and if you know all the action objects that went into your reducer, you can see exactly later what the user must have seen in his or her browser. You could also implement undo and redo just based on action objects. But I've said the cool thing about React and Redux is that we can see every part here, or almost every part here, in the code. So let's take a look at the code and see where we find those parts again. Let's start with the components. We wrote the components ourselves, like, for example, the greeter component. So we are back in the app that we just tested, where we have this input field here, and we can input the greeting, and it says Hello Workshop. So we have the greeter component here, and we can even see this wrapper we've created. That's exactly the greeter container here that we create with Connect. So this is our presentational component, the presentational component, and this is our container component. So we have seen those things here directly in the code. We also see how we get the state from the store into the component. We see this directly in the store. This is our function map state to props. This function tells us that this greeter component has two properties, to greet and greeting, and it tells us exactly how to get these two values from the store. So we also see this part of the picture explicitly in the code. Let's look at the other side of the picture now. What if a DOM event happens? What happens then? When a DOM event happens, the event handler should call an action creator and return an action object. And we will see the event handler and the action creator in the code. Let's look at it. We have our event handler here, onChange. This onChange event handler uses our toGreetChange action creator, and the toGreetChange action creator is implemented here, and it returns an action object which looks exactly like this. It has this type, greeting changed, and it gets the new value from the input field as its payload, and the payload is a single property called toGreet. So now we have seen the event handler, the action creator, and the action in the code. We do not see the list of all actions in the code, but I have installed the Redux logging middleware, so we at least see all the actions here in the browser console. So if I type world here, then we see all actions that ever happened. We see the list of actions together with their previous state and their next state here in the browser console. So we even see the list of actions, but not in the code. And then there's one thing missing, the reducer, which is a pure function that computes the next state based on the current state and the current action. And of course we see this one in the code too. It's here in our reducer.js. Here we see the function, we wrote it ourselves, and it takes an action and the current state and computes the next state, which is this object in the only case that's interesting to this reducer. So while this picture is an interesting mental model for all kinds of user interface applications, with React and Redux you see all the parts from this big picture directly in the code or in the browser. You even see the Redux store because you create the store, and there you will also see the initial state. This short instructional video is part of my 2-day React Redux training course. I sell it online for only 29 euros. So basically, for the price of a textbook, you get 24 instructional videos that teach you everything you need to know to build great web apps with React and Redux. You get 12 labs where you can practice what you've learned. You get 18 screencasts that will help you with the labs. And you get checklists and other training materials like all the presentations I show and written notes of what I've said during the videos. So get it now at quickglance.at/React. Thank you.